Late at night in Korea, a familiar sight lingered within the Hunters Association headquarters. There was a rumor that the office of the president could always be found by its lights, still glowing long after everyone else had left. This night was no different. President Go Gunhee sat at his desk, alone in the silence of his office, buried in paperwork, yet something weighed heavier on him than the work in front of him. For a while now, his heart had been restless. The deep, irregular beats echoed in his chest, a constant reminder of his physical limits. It had started years ago, but recently the unease had grown stronger, making it harder to ignore. Gunhee's heart thumped heavily, as if it were warning him of something. He couldn't shake the feeling that the end might be near. Doctors had warned him before. They had told him that if he continued at this relentless pace, his heart might not be able to hold out for long. They had predicted half a year at most, but that prediction had been wrong. 2 years had passed since then. Gunhee knew he had pushed his limits, and somehow he had survived beyond expectations. Perhaps, he thought, it was a miracle that he had lasted this long. The sound of a phone ringing broke the silence in President Go Gunhee's office. He glanced at the clock, wondering who would call him at such a late hour. When he answered, it was his wife on the other end, checking in to see if everything was all right. Her concern was a familiar comfort, especially with how late he often worked. Hearing her voice made him relax for a moment. She always worried about him, especially given his health. He reassured her, about to mention that he was getting ready to leave for the night. But before he could finish, the call abruptly cut off, replaced by static. He frowned, confused by the sudden interruption. There was no response when he tried to speak again. As he lowered the phone, something out of the ordinary caught his attention. He looked out the window, expecting to see the familiar view of the city. The streets, the skyline, everything had been swallowed by a pitch-black void, as if the entire city had disappeared. Startled, Gunhee quickly stood up, his heart racing. But before he could process what was happening, he noticed something even more unsettling. There, sitting casually on his couch, was a figure he had never seen before. Its presence was strange, unnatural, as if it had always been there, unnoticed until now. The being's appearance was eerie, a pale face, long white hair, and sharp pointed ears. Its silvery eyes gleamed like precious stones, and its entire presence radiated coldness. It resembled an ice elf, a creature known as an ice slayer, something out of a nightmare. President Go Gunhee's eyes stayed fixed on the mysterious figure sitting before him. There was something unnerving about the creature, and he couldn't shake the thought running through his mind. How was it possible that he hadn't sensed this being's presence until now? This stranger wasn't someone he could face alone. Their aura was far too overwhelming for him to handle. His instincts told him that this creature was far more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered. As Gunhee tried to make sense of the situation, the creature spoke, its voice cold and matter of fact. It explained that the office, and likely the entire area, had been isolated from the outside world. Gunhee's thoughts raced. Could this be a dream? It felt so unreal, but before he could fully grasp that possibility, something sharp and fast cut through the air. A shard of glass struck his shoulder. Gunhee gasped in pain, but no blood flowed from the wound. Instead, his skin was frozen, covered in a layer of frost where the glass had hit him. The cold sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt. He looked at his wound, then back at the creature. It hadn't moved from its spot on the couch, its expression calm as ever. The icy attack proved one thing to Gunhee: this wasn't a dream. The pain and frost were all too real. Realizing this, he focused on the situation at hand. The creature before him wasn't human, and it seemed to know more than it was letting on. Gunhee needed answers, so he asked again, this time with more urgency. Who was this being? The figure seemed slightly disappointed as it responded. It had hoped that Gunhee would recognize it without needing an introduction, but to this powerful creature, Gunhee was nothing more than an ordinary human, unable to grasp its true nature. That term, mere human, echoed in Gunhee's mind as he tried to understand the meaning behind it. The creature continued, its tone dismissive as it referred to Gunhee as a fragment of luminosity. It seemed to mock him, suggesting that he feared revealing his true self. But according to the creature, it wouldn't matter. The vessel Gunhee inhabited was already at its limit and would soon break, no matter what he did. The magic beast had made up its mind. The conversation was over. Without hesitation, a powerful blast of cold air erupted from the creature's hand. The explosion shook the room, filling it with a dense white fog that obscured everything from view. The temperature plummeted, and visibility dropped to nothing. In the midst of the freezing haze, two glowing lights pierced through the fog. They were the fierce, golden eyes of President Go. His arm swung with great force, deflecting the cold blast away from him and into a nearby wall. The impact was tremendous, causing the wall to crumble, revealing a vast, endless void beyond it, a dimension that seemed to stretch into infinite darkness. Slowly, as the fog began to clear, Gunhee's figure emerged, fully visible. His body was surrounded by a radiant golden aura aura, a powerful energy that illuminated the space around him. This aura was nothing like his usual appearance. Gunhee understood what had happened. His office had been sealed off from the outside world, trapped in a dimensional rift created by the magic beast. The magic beast, the Frost Monarch, finally spoke, addressing Gunhee as the fragment of luminosity. The creature had been searching for him for a long time, unaware that such great power had been trapped in what it called a broken vessel. The Frost Monarch revealed that it had already located the 7 fragments of luminosity and 2 had already been destroyed. Its only purpose now was to witness the prideful humiliation on Gunhee's face before ending his life. Gunhee, however, did not back down. His roar echoed with defiance, daring the Frost Monarch to try and defeat him, but the Frost Monarch found his resolve amusing, almost mocking. It couldn't believe that Gunhee, a being merely borrowing the body of a human, would dare to challenge it. The Frost Monarch, who had fully conquered its own vessel, felt assured of its superiority, questioning whether Gunhee could even land a single hit. The Frost Monarch crossed his hands, summoning a massive, screeching wall of ice that surged forward with deadly force toward Gunhee. Reacting swiftly, Gunhee dodged by a hair's breadth. The ice whistled past his head, missing him by inches. With his fist clenched tight, Gunhee swung with all his might, smashing through the icy barrier. The wall shattered into countless pieces, scattering across the room. Without hesitation, Gunhee aimed a powerful punch directly at the Frost Monarch, but the Monarch was quick. Too quick. In a fluid motion, the Frost Monarch dodged the strike with ease and countered by forming a sharp spear of ice. It sliced across Gunhee's shoulder, leaving a deep wound. The Monarch, overconfident, had momentarily lowered his guard. Gunhee spotted the brief opening and lunged, hoping to seize the advantage. But the Frost Monarch wasn't caught off guard for long. It reacted swiftly, and the two forces collided in a chaotic burst of hot and cold energy. The explosion shook the room, sending shockwaves through the air. The impact was deafening. The violent clash echoed in the enclosed space. As the battle raged on, Gunhee's movements began to slow. His once powerful attacks grew sluggish, and his injuries multiplied. His breaths, now heavy and labored, escaped as cold, white mist in the freezing air. His strength was fading. He could feel it. Desperation surged through Gunhee. He knew he had to end the fight while he still had the strength to move. Gathering his remaining energy, he lunged once more at the Frost Monarch, fist bared, determined to land a final blow. But his efforts were futile. The Monarch effortlessly blocked the attack, stopping Gunhee in his tracks. In that moment, a realization struck President Go Gunhee. His power was fading fast, and his body, the vessel that held his strength, was reaching its limit. The Monarch stood tall, completely unscathed, and its cold, indifferent gaze fell upon Gunhee with a sense of pity, knowing full well that Gunhee had reached his breaking point. Suddenly, the Frost Monarch vanished. Gunhee barely had time to process what had happened before it reappeared right in front of him, moving at lightning speed. Before he could react, a sharp spear of ice pierced through his chest and emerged from his back. The searing pain shot through him, and blood filled his mouth. Gunhee coughed violently, his strength quickly draining away. The Frost Monarch stood over Gunhee, its presence towering, with a cruel grin spreading across its face. It mocked him silently, wondering how long it would take for Gunhee to find a new vessel. Perhaps a year, maybe 2, but it was of little consequence. The Monarch's forces had already gathered, their power ready to bring ruin to this world. There was no time left for Gunhee to make a return. In the Monarch's cold gaze, it saw Gunhee's attempts to protect this world as nothing more than a foolish endeavor. The thought lingered. How could Gunhee have believed that he stood a chance without his guards by his side? Despite the pain and blood spilling from his mouth, Gunhee laughed. His grip tightened on the spear that impaled him, defiant even in his weakened state. He had not fought in vain. There was something the Monarch had missed. Just as they hadn't predicted the Frost Monarch would follow in their footsteps. The Frost Monarch paused, confused. What could it have missed? Just then, the Monarch's instincts kicked in. It quickly jerked its head to the side, sensing something powerful. In an instant, an immense blast of magic power shot past its face with such force that it singed Gunhee's right arm. The explosion that followed was immense, shaking the very fabric of the dimension they were trapped in. The blast hit the wall that separated their reality from the outside world. Monarch's mocking grin faded as it stared at Gunhee, feeling a momentary doubt. Gunhee had claimed there was something important at play, but the Monarch found it hard to believe that anything could truly threaten its victory. The Monarch's eyes gleamed with arrogance, dismissing Gunhee's words as a last-ditch effort to delay the inevitable. But Gunhee's calm smile persisted. In a moment of eerie calm, the Monarch heard a faint cracking sound. The barrier it had so confidently constructed, isolating their battle from the outside world, was now splintering. The Monarch turned, eyes wide, as it saw the mana barrier shatter with a deafening crash. The world around them snapped back to its original form. The Monarch's expression shifted from triumph to confusion. This couldn't be the important thing Gunhee had mentioned, could it? A shattered barrier didn't seem capable of changing the outcome of this battle. Yet Gunhee had one final move left. Summoning the last reserves of his energy, he let out a cry. Beneath his feet, something emerged from the shadows. A figure, an ant-like creature, skittering forward with remarkable speed. The Monarch barely had time to react as the shadowy figure darted past it, leaping through the shattered window with an ear-piercing scream. The Frost Monarch's gaze followed the creature, confusion etched on its face. An ant from the abyss. It seemed like an insignificant threat, but then a chilling realization struck the Monarch. This wasn't just any foot soldier. The ruler had conserved his energy, even at the cost of his own body, for this exact moment. The Frost Monarch's eyes widened in horror. It had been wrong to dismiss this creature. Reacting with desperation, the Monarch hurled Gunhee aside and chased after the escaping ant. Ice swirled around its hand, forming a deadly icicle. It closed the distance between them in a blink, the sickle raised, ready to strike. But just as the Monarch prepared to land the fatal blow, something stopped it. A hand gripped the Monarch's sickle with a crushing force. In an instant, the Monarch found itself immobilized. Shock surged through its body as it turned its gaze to see the one who had intervened. It wasn't the ant anymore. No, standing before the Monarch, holding it in a death grip, was Sung Jeju. His cold, piercing eyes locked onto the Monarch, and in that moment, the Monarch's heart sank. Jeju tightened his grip on the Frost Monarch's throat and wrist, feeling the creature's body resist under his immense strength. The cracking sound of bones followed, accompanied by the beast's cry of pain. Yet even in this moment of weakness, the Monarch's mind was sharp, calculating. The Frost Monarch could sense the sheer number of shadows lurking behind Jeju, an army ready to strike. It realized that Jeju, the Monarch of Shadows, had amassed an extraordinary force. Yet the question lingered, why had Jeju not revealed himself earlier, even with such overwhelming strength? As the Monarch processed this, Jeju's mind drifted momentarily, recalling a past encounter. He had nearly forgotten about this creature, a being similar to an ice elf, one that had failed to be extracted from the world's cycle. In desperation, the Frost Monarch gritted its teeth, cold energy rapidly gathering within its mouth. A blast of freezing air erupted from the beast, narrowly missing Jeju as he swiftly moved back, increasing the distance between them. The display of raw magic confirmed Jeju's suspicions. This Monarch was indeed a powerful magic user. Without hesitation, Jeju summoned his demon Monarch daggers. The twin blades gleamed as he swung them with precision. With one powerful strike, he shattered the ice wall that the Frost Monarch had conjured, reducing it to nothing more than shards that scattered across the room. The Frost Monarch, sensing the intensity of the situation, suddenly suggested stopping the battle. It wasn't here to risk everything in a life or death fight. This abrupt shift caught Jeju off guard, leaving him questioning the Monarch's intentions. Jeju, with a moment of clarity, realized what the Frost Monarch was truly after. The mention of a human struck him. The ant he had placed on President Go Gunhee, his shadow soldier, had been protecting the chairman. In a flash, it dawned on him. President Go was in grave danger. He turned his gaze to the president's body. Blood covered Go Gunhee's unconscious form, and it was clear that the man was barely holding on to life. The sight ignited a sense of urgency in Jeju. The Frost Monarch, seeing Jeju's realization, presented him with a cruel choice. With cold detachment, the Monarch conjured a massive, lethal ice spear, and without hesitation, it launched the spear directly at President Go. The decision was now in Jeju's hands: continue the fight or save the chairman. Jeju immediately activated his skill, Ruler's Authority, attempting to intercept the attack. But a sudden notification flashed before his eyes. His opponent's magic was resisting his authority. The Frost Monarch's power was too strong. Frustration surged through Jeju. He slammed his foot hard into the ground before sprinting towards President Go. The air around him trembled as he moved with lightning speed, the ice spear inching closer to the chairman with every second. The tension was palpable as the deadly spear approached its target. With a final burst of energy, Jeju reached President Go's side just in time, his hand striking the spear mid-flight. The ice weapon veered off course with a sharp screech, missing its intended target. Though relieved to have saved the chairman, Jeju was seething with rage. His eyes bore into the Frost Monarch, who stood waiting, fully aware of the emotional turmoil it had created. But before Jeju Jeju could retaliate, the Monarch summoned a portal. It dashed toward the swirling gateway, intending to escape before the battle could escalate further. Filled with rage at the Frost Monarch's deceitful tactics, Jeju quickly summoned Barca's dagger from his inventory and hurled it with precision. The sharp blade sliced through the air, heading straight for the Monarch. In a swift and deadly strike, the dagger embedded itself deep into the Monarch's shoulder. The Monarch let out a pained snarl, glaring furiously at the dagger lodged in its flesh. The wound, though small, was an insult to the Monarch's pride. Its cold eyes met Jeju's, filled with fury and contempt. The Frost Monarch, barely containing its anger, gnashed its teeth, seething at the audacity of a mere vessel wounding it. Despite the pain, the Monarch made a chilling proclamation. It would retreat for now, but vowed to return once again when Jeju's shadows opened. And with a final taunt, the Monarch cruelly referred to the near-dead state of President Go Gunhee as a parting gift, implying that the chairman would soon be added to Jeju's shadow army. Jeju's frustration boiled over, but before he could act, the Monarch disappeared into the shrinking gate, vanishing from sight. The portal closed slowly, sealing the Monarch's retreat, leaving Jeju with no opportunity to pursue. He could only watch as his enemy escaped. As the last remnants of the portal faded, Jeju reflected on the battle. The powerful barrier that had surrounded the office had completely dulled his senses, leaving him unable to detect the danger until it was too late. He cursed the situation but knew there was little he could do at that moment. His attention shifted back to the wounded President Go, knowing that there was still work to be done. President Go Gunhee lay motionless in a pool of his own blood, his body weak and broken from the battle. A faint groan of pain escaped his lips as his life hung by a thread. Jeju stood over him, assessing the damage. It wasn't something that could be healed with a simple healing potion. The severity of the injuries was beyond what he could fix with ordinary means. Realizing the urgency, Jeju called out with authority, summoning one of his most trusted soldiers. From a distance, he sensed the swift approach of Beru, flying with great speed. The Ant General crashed through several walls in his haste to obey his master's command, kneeling before Jeju upon arrival. Jeju ordered Beru to do everything in his power to save the dying president. Without hesitation, Beru channeled all his magic into healing the wounded man. A warm, glowing energy enveloped President Go, but despite Beru's full effort, the president's condition didn't improve. His complexion remained as pale as before. Beru, confused and concerned, reported the failure of his healing magic. Even with his best efforts, the old man's presence grew weaker, slipping further away from life. In desperation, Jeju considered using the holy water of life, an elixir with the power to heal even the gravest wounds. He quickly retrieved the elixir of life from his inventory, determined to save the chairman, but before he could administer it, a weakened hand reached up and grabbed his wrist, halting his attempt. It was President Go. With great difficulty, he struggled to open his eyes. His breath labored and shallow. His gaze met Jeju's, full of gratitude and acceptance. He knew his time was coming to an end. The president managed to whisper words of thanks for Jeju's arrival, knowing that nothing more could be done. He had already suffered damage beyond repair from the Frost Monarch's attack. His voice was faint as he spoke about the encounter with a supreme being and the looming battle between their forces and those of the Monarchs. There were things he had learned, things he believed Jeju needed to know for the coming struggle. Blood filled President Go Gunhee's mouth as his life force continued to fade, his body barely able to hold on. Jeju, filled with emotion, called out in desperation, but deep down he knew time was running out. The end was near. Despite his condition, President Go managed to speak. He was relieved that Jeju was there, grateful for the power Jeju possessed, and thanked him for it. His voice was weak, yet filled with a sense of peace, as he explained that the gates and dungeons weren't just for the enemies. They had been a means of protection, a way to safeguard humanity. Each word was laced with struggle, and he coughed as the effort drained him further. The president's words carried a warning for Jeju. One day, a moment would come where Jeju would have to make a critical choice about which side to stand on. With his weakening hand, Gunhee held Jeju's, pleading with him to remain on the side of humans, no matter what. His tone carried the weight of experience, regret, and hope all at once. Gunhee confessed how he had always wanted to fight alongside the young hunters, to protect the world with them, but his aged body had limited his ability to do so. Yet he had no regrets. Meeting someone like Jeju gave him comfort, knowing that the future was in capable hands. With each labored breath, Gunhee revealed that his heart had beaten for far longer than expected, despite his failing health. It had endured all this time, he believed, just so he could meet Jeju. The realization that he had held on for this very moment brought him peace, and the pain in his voice tugged at Jeju's heart. Jeju, standing silently beside him, listened to the dying man's final wishes, unable to do anything but respect them. Tears filled President Go's eyes as he expressed his immense relief and gratitude one last time. His hand slipped from Jenu's grasp, hitting the floor with a finality that could not be denied. There was nothing more to say. Jeju stood still, his head lowered, emotions swirling within him. Outside the shattered window, the sky, once overcast, finally released its rain. The soft, steady fall of raindrops added a somber backdrop to the quiet room where the weight of loss hung heavy. The cold autumn wind accompanied the rainfall as headlines flashed across the news channels. The world had been shaken by the news of Hunter Jonas from Brazil, found dead in a nearby river, and the brutal murder of Go Gunhee, chairman of the Korean Hunters Association, who had been stabbed in the heart. Adding to the chaos, the names of Christopher Reed, Jonas, and Go Gunhee, once considered the world's greatest hunters, were now all listed among the fallen. The sudden deaths of these top hunters sent shockwaves across the globe, leaving humanity in a state of panic. Every media outlet focused on the grim events, and even the U.S. Hunter Association issued a joint statement. The world was asking a terrifying question. Humans were protected by hunters, but who would protect the hunters? The threat that loomed over the world now was of an entirely different magnitude. As people gathered for the funeral of President Go Gunhee, the atmosphere was heavy with grief. Rain poured down relentlessly, mirroring the somber mood that gripped everyone in attendance. Jeju stood silently, his gaze focused on the ground, lost in thought. The weight of everything that had happened weighed on him, and the sadness of the moment was only amplified by the steady rhythm of raindrops hitting the earth. Jenu's eyes shifted, catching sight of Woo Jim-chul nearby. The director looked completely drained, his exhaustion evident in every movement. His normally sharp appearance was replaced with a disheveled look as he absently fidgeted with the stubble on his chin. The loss of the chairman had hit him hard, and it was clear that he hadn't been himself since the tragedy. The rain continued to fall, trickling down Jim-chul's face as he tilted his head upward, gazing at the gray sky. He seemed lost in thought, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had happened. Only yesterday, the chairman had spoken to him, eager to hear about Jim-chul's time in the United States, urging him to hurry back. And now, just like that, he was gone. The reality of it still felt surreal to Jim-chul, as if he were caught in some cruel dream. Jim-chul's mind wandered back to that fateful moment. He had thanked Jeju for being there with the chairman during his last moments. Despite his power, Jeju had been unable to prevent the inevitable. Jenu's heart burned with a cold fury. The rain washed over him, but it couldn't cool the fire inside. The monster that had taken the chairman's life would pay. Jeju had made a silent vow, a promise to himself and to Go Gunhee's memory. No matter the cost, he would hunt down the one responsible. The rain poured harder, but it could not wash away the grief or the oath that now bound him to his mission. After the death of Chairman Go Gunhee, Jeju made a critical decision. He turned to Woo Jim-chul, asking him to gather the reporters. The news of the chairman's passing had already spread, and despite the tight space, the press conference room was crowded with eager reporters, desperate for answers. The atmosphere was tense, the chatter loud and chaotic, but as soon as Jeju entered, the noise faded, and every eye in the room locked onto him. Jenu's presence commanded attention, and as he began to speak, he addressed the room, revealing alarming news. A colony of highly intelligent monsters was targeting the world's strongest hunters. These creatures were unlike anything the hunters had faced before. Far stronger, more strategic, and indifferent to the conventional ways of combat or protection. Their methods were cunning, isolating their targets with powerful magic that blocked open spaces, leaving their prey vulnerable. One reporter, unable to contain their curiosity, asked if the monster responsible for Chairman Go's death was part of this colony. Jeju, without hesitation, confirmed the connection. He warned that anyone who believed they might be hunted by these monsters should surround themselves with comrades, people they could trust to protect them in such dire moments. But even as he spoke, Jenu's thoughts turned inward. The creature that had killed Go Gunhee had called itself the Monarch of the Frost. It wasn't just a monster, it was a being with a title, a position of immense power. The Monarchs, including this one, the Monarch of the Beginning, and even Jeju himself, the Monarch of the Shadows, were beyond the strength of the strongest hunters. These were forces that no ordinary person or hunter could hope to defeat alone. Jeju then made his final statement to the room, ensuring the weight of his message was clear. For those who did not have comrades by their side, for those who felt alone and vulnerable, they should reach out to him through the Korean Hunters Association. He would offer them the protection they needed. The Battle of Monarchs had only just begun, and Jeju knew it would shape the fate of the world. In the cold, dimly lit cave, the atmosphere was tense. The biting chill could freeze a human's blood, but the monarchs gathered there felt nothing from the freezing temperatures. The real cold came from the mood they shared, as unsettling news had reached them. Ahjin, the frost monarch, had retreated to this hidden ice cave after barely escaping. Now, it had summoned the other monarchs currently dwelling on Earth. As they arrived, the cave filled with an air of power and authority. There were 3 men and 1 woman: Tarnak, the monarch of the iron body; Yogamut, the monarch of transfiguration; Rakan, the monarch of beasts; and Queresha, the monarch of plagues. Ahjin wasted no time in speaking to the assembled monarchs. The words cut through the tension like ice. The shadow monarch had surfaced. The others reacted immediately, their disbelief clear. Yogamut, the monarch of transfiguration, expressed doubt. According to what they knew, no vessel should be able to fully contain the true power of the shadow monarch. It was the same reason the Dragon King couldn't remain on the surface of the earth. But Ahjin's experience left no room for doubt. With a grim seriousness, the Frost Monarch confirmed what it had seen with its own eyes. The Shadow Monarch was far more dangerous than they had anticipated, an even greater threat than the fragment of brilliant light. In the cold cave, the tension among the monarchs thickened as Ahjin, the Frost Monarch, addressed the group. With the threat of the Shadow Monarch looming, Ahjin proposed a bold plan: to take on the Shadow Monarch directly and eliminate him before his power fully manifested. His gaze moved across the faces of the other monarchs, seeking their support in the risky endeavor. Tarnak, the monarch of the iron body, responded first. His tone was cold and dismissive. Picking a fight with one of the strongest among the 9 monarchs was nothing short of suicide. He questioned why they wouldn't simply wait for the Monarch of Destruction, the Dragon King, to return and handle the situation. Frustration flickered in Ahjin's eyes as he clenched his shoulder, his teeth grinding with impatience. He couldn't stand the idea of just waiting. They were monarchs after all, powerful beings in their own right, yet here they were, fleeing and hiding, relying on the hope that the Dragon King might return. Ahjin believed their only chance to defeat the Shadow Monarch was now, while he still inhabited a human form. He pleaded for their help, vowing to take full responsibility and ensure the Shadow Monarch was erased from existence. But Tarnak was unmoved. He refused to involve himself, unwilling to risk his own life. Yogamut, the monarch of transfiguration, also declined, not wanting to share the fate of the monarch of white flames, who had been defeated. Both feared what would happen if they fell to the Shadow Monarch's authority, a power capable of sending them into an eternal slumber. Tarnak reminded the group of what had happened to the Monarch of White Flames, emphasizing the danger of being caught by the Shadow Monarch's ability and being turned into one of his servants. Rakan, the monarch of beasts, growled in frustration, calling them cowards. He refused to believe that the Shadow Monarch could turn them, beings in their original forms, into his servants. Tarnak, however, warned him that the Shadow Monarch and the Administrator appeared to be working together, a collaboration that made their situation even more dangerous. Tarnak suggested that the Shadow Monarch could replicate them, turning them into mere tools in his world. With that, both Yogamut and Tarnak made their decision. They summoned portals and vanished into the air, leaving only 3 monarchs behind. Rakan turned to Ahjin, the Frost Monarch, his impatience growing. He demanded proof that the Shadow Monarch still retained his humanity. In response, Ahjin revealed the dagger Jeju had thrown during their encounter. It was coated with poison, something that Ashborn, the true Shadow Monarch, would never have needed. This small act confirmed that Jeju, the vessel, was still human to some degree, relying on such tactics. Queresha, the Monarch of Plagues, considered this information with a cruel smile. She mocked the use of poison, suggesting that if the Shadow Monarch had full control of his human form, he wouldn't have needed to resort to such trickery. But the realization that the vessel still had weaknesses intrigued her. Ahjin's eyes shifted between Rakan and Queresha as he asked again, would they join him? She agreed to join Ahjin, seeing an opportunity to exploit this vulnerability. With a grin of determination, Rakan clenched his teeth, resolving to join the fight. The battle against the Shadow Monarch was inevitable, and the monarchs would stop at nothing to see him destroyed. A somber atmosphere enveloped the streets as people gathered to pay their respects to President Go Gunhee. His memorial service was attended by many who had personally experienced his leadership and generosity over the years. The public, both mournful and reflective, watched as television networks interrupted their regular programming to honor President Go's life and legacy. Clips played, showcasing his bold actions and words, reminding everyone of the impact he had on the nation. One notable moment was when footage aired of President Go Go, calling out Congressman Junwook Nam. His voice carried a weight of urgency as he spoke about the dangers the world faced. He had warned of the perils of an S-rank gate and the reality that, no matter how much money one possessed, no wealth could guarantee survival in such situations. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of hunters in protecting humanity. Following this, an interview with President Go's longtime doctor was aired. The doctor recounted a personal moment between him and the chairman, recalling how President Go had shared his thoughts during the battle on Jeju Island. As Hunter Sung Jinu fought against the monstrous ants, President Go had confided that his lifelong wish had been fulfilled. He had felt a sense of peace, saying that he could now rest knowing that his goal had been achieved. The doctor, however, expressed disbelief that such words would soon be followed by President Go's untimely death. The scenes were filled with an overwhelming sense of loss, as the nation came to terms with the void left by the man who had dedicated his life to safeguarding them. Later that night, Jinu stood at the top of Daesung Tower, a towering skyscraper that rose 100 stories into the sky. The wind howled around him, but he remained unfazed, his sharp gaze sweeping across the vast city below like a predator searching for its next target. He focused intently, trying to sense something that was eluding him. Jinu recalled his recent encounter with the Frost Monarch. He had not sensed any shadow following the Frost Monarch during their fight. The Monarch had claimed to be in his original form, which aligned with what Jinu had learned from the Monarch of Giants. Monarchs and rulers, in their true forms, couldn't be turned into shadow soldiers. This revelation meant that without shadows, one of Jinu's most reliable methods of tracking them had been blocked. Still, his eyes glimmered with determination. Even without his usual advantage, it didn't matter. He was a hunter, and hunters never failed to track down their prey. His resolve was unshaken, knowing that he wouldn't rest until he hunted the Frost Monarch. Meanwhile, across the city, an important executive meeting was taking place. The leadership of the Korean Hunters Association gathered to address the vacancy left by the death of President Go Gunhee. Over 30 key figures attended, including the vice president, the directors of various branches, and the heads of all departments. In the large conference room of the Korean Hunters Association, the vice president addressed the gathered leaders with a serious tone. It had been a week since President Go Gunhee's passing, and the vacant position of chairman weighed heavily on everyone present. The vice president made it clear that the time had come to find a successor, someone who could fill the void left by the late chairman. One of the leaders raised a concern. The fact that Go Gunhee, an S-rank hunter, had led the association had symbolic significance. His presence had helped maintain balance and control over the great guilds. With his absence, the question of who could oversee these powerful organizations now loomed large. The vice president responded cautiously, acknowledging the influence that high-ranked hunters held, but warning against the idea of simply hiring another S-rank hunter from outside. Bringing in someone unfamiliar with the association could cause further complications, so they needed to approach the situation carefully. After much deliberation, the vice president finally revealed the decision. The directors had reached a consensus. They recommended Woo Jim-chul, the chief inspector, as the new president of the association. The room fell into a brief silence as Jim-chul, surprised by the nomination, couldn't believe what he was hearing. He hesitated, feeling unworthy of the position. Despite his skills and experience, he doubted whether he was the right choice, mentioning his youth and the fact that others of higher rank were more qualified. However, the other leaders were resolute. They reminded Jim-chul that it wasn't just about being an S-rank hunter. His leadership abilities, his reputation among the hunters, and his influence in pulling together teams during critical moments made him the ideal candidate. He had a unique connection with the most powerful hunter, Sung Jinu, which was seen as a great advantage. The leaders emphasized that no one else had the ability to move the greatest forces in Korea like Jim-chul did. Though Jim-chul remained unsure, the leaders made it clear that they could not force their decision upon him. Instead, they asked him to consider the proposal carefully. After a moment of thought, Jim-chul nodded, accepting the heavy responsibility that had been placed upon him. Late at night, the sky above the Scavenger Guild was dark, matching the mood inside. Thomas Andre, the guildmaster, and his assistant Laura made their way to the underground floor of the guild's headquarters. It had been a long time since Thomas last visited this place, and his presence caught the security guards off guard. They were clearly surprised to see him, but he reassured them to relax as he approached the security system. Placing his thumb on the fingerprint scanner, the automated door quietly slid open, revealing the hidden storage area. Laura followed him in, her curiosity curiosity piqued by the task at hand. She questioned whether Thomas was really thinking of giving away the valuable items stored there. These weren't just ordinary objects. They were weapons of the highest caliber, the best of their kind in the world. Laura couldn't hide her skepticism, but Thomas was firm in his decision. The two of them entered the storage room, and in front of them stood the very reason for their visit, the rare and powerful daggers. Thomas stood before the glass case that held them, admiration in his eyes. The daggers were incredible, rare treasures that amazed him every time he saw them. Laura pointed out that there were only 2 such weapons in the entire world, and that their rarity would likely remain unchanged in the future. Despite their value, Thomas had made up his mind. He believed that these daggers were not living up to their true potential, rotting away in a storage room when they could be in the hands of someone worthy. His decision to give them away was final, and as he grinned, the light above seemed to catch the daggers, making them gleam brightly as if responding to his thoughts. News reports were flooding the media all over Korea. The headlines were abuzz with the announcement that Woo Jim-chul had been appointed as the new chairman of the Korean Hunter Association. The shocking news of the previous chairman's death was still fresh in the minds of the public, and now a new face had taken on the role. Woo Jim-chul, known for his calm and composed demeanor, was praised for his leadership, but the country remained uneasy. The world, too, felt more unstable than ever before. Gina sat at home, watching the news. Her mind buzzed with the unsettling thought of how unpredictable the world had become. She commented out loud, wondering how someone so young and handsome had become the new chairman, right after the murder of the former one. As she glanced back, she noticed her mother, Kyung-hee, busy at the kitchen sink, washing dishes. A playful grin formed on Gina's face as she quietly tiptoed towards her mother, moving like a cat, and suddenly hugged her from behind. Her mother, caught by surprise, laughed softly. Kyung-hee then asked Gina, in her usual warm tone, if she could help by taking out the trash. Gina, with her usual laziness, refused and made herself comfortable. However, after a moment of silence, Gina's thoughts wandered to something more serious. Out of nowhere, she suggested they move to a new place. The thought lingered in the air for a moment, and Kyung-hee paused, clearly taken aback by the suggestion. Gina pressed on as she couldn't shake off the feeling of wanting something different, something safer. But Kyung-hee was attached to the old apartment. She loved the familiarity of the place, the memories it held. With a lighthearted tone, Kyung-hee tried to shift the mood and asked Gina to retrieve the clothes from the washer. Gina, feeling a bit defeated, grumbled as she walked back to her room. She picked up the laundry basket with little enthusiasm, her mind still occupied with the idea of moving. But as she looked up, something stopped her in her tracks. Her eyes widened, and the basket slipped from her grasp, tumbling to the floor. Gina was left speechless, and all she could manage was a surprised gasp as she called out to her mother. Outside the Ahjin Guild's office, a crowd had gathered, buzzing with excitement. Whispers spread through the people as they exchanged their disbelief over the situation. The idea that Thomas Andre, the famed Goliath of America, was inside the small guild's office left many stunned. It seemed surreal, yet it was true. Inside, Jinho was struggling to maintain his composure. His stiff face barely managed a smile, and sweat dripped down his forehead as he tried to handle the pressure. He could hardly believe it. Thomas Andre was in their office, and not just him. Leonard Nierman, the strongest hunter in Germany, was there as well. 2 hours had passed since their arrival, and the tension was palpable. Jinho anxiously checked his phone again, praying for Jinwoo to answer his calls. Jinho's thoughts raced. The fact that these 2 legendary hunters were sitting in their guild office waiting for Jinwoo was almost too much to process. Where was his boss, and why hadn't he responded yet? Leonard, sitting quietly, was equally in awe. The Goliath himself, Thomas Andre, was searching for Sung Jinwoo. It was a thought that seemed almost absurd to him. Leonard wondered if he would even get the chance to meet Jinwoo today. Nearby, Laura, Thomas Andre's assistant, calmly translated her boss's words, mentioning how it seemed like Sung Jinwoo was in the middle of a raid, considering his absence from the office. Jinho could only nod, confirming nervously. He tried to guess where Jinwoo might be and hoped his boss would return soon. Just as Jinho debated calling Jinwoo once more, the office's automatic doors slid open with a quiet hiss. Jinwoo had returned. The relief on Jinho's face was immediate. His eyes widened, and he leaped from his seat, rushing to greet his boss. Every ounce of desperation and stress he had been carrying for the past 2 hours poured out in his actions, reflecting the relief of everyone in the room. As Jeju entered the room, he immediately locked eyes with Thomas Andre, who waved at him in a casual yet imposing manner. Jeju's sharp instincts had already alerted him to the presence of the powerful hunter. He had noticed the crowd of reporters outside the building and knew something unusual was happening. Sensing the overwhelming aura coming from Thomas, Jeju was certain the American hunter had been waiting for him. Jinho, clearly relieved but also anxious, rushed to Jeju, his voice filled with concern. He couldn't help but question why Jeju hadn't answered his calls. Jeju, calm as ever, explained that he had been busy dealing with the recent surge of gate outbreaks. His disheveled appearance confirmed his words, and Jinho's eyes briefly shifted to his boss's clothes, torn and dirtied from the constant action. Jeju's mind wandered to his loyal summons, Beru and Igris, both of whom were nearing another rank up. It wasn't the time for him to relax, there was much to be done. At that moment, Thomas Andre stood up from his seat, his towering figure adding to the weight of his presence. He strode confidently toward Jeju, his greeting casual yet filled with an unspoken tension. Jinho, standing nearby, felt the atmosphere shift and nervously wondered if these two titans were about to clash right there in the office. Jeju, curious about Thomas's sudden visit to Korea, asked about his intentions. Thomas, smiling, reminded Jeju of the promise they had made, the promise to share a meal together once his arm had fully healed. But there was more. Thomas had brought a gift, something he hinted was not only valuable but dangerous. Jeju raised an eyebrow, surprised by the mention of a gift. The conversation took a more serious tone as Thomas suggested they move to a more private location. The item he carried was too dangerous to hand over in the office. Jeju's thoughts raced as he considered the possibilities. Could it be a weapon? Or worse, a bomb? Jinho, overhearing the exchange, muttered quietly to himself, his nerves getting the better of him. He couldn't help but feel suspicious of Thomas's offer, fearing it might be a trap. Jeju shifted his gaze toward the other figure in the room. It was Leonard Neerman, who introduced himself with a respectful tone. Jeju immediately guessed that Leonard was likely there to request some kind of protection commission, typical for a hunter of his status. But before the conversation could go further, Thomas Andre stepped in, his large frame moving to cover Leonard. The American hunter was direct, urging Jeju to get going with him, signaling the importance of their meeting. Leonard, clearly frustrated after waiting over 2 hours for this opportunity, voiced his desire to join the discussion. His argument was simple. He felt that his patience had earned him a spot at the table, but Thomas's glare quickly shut that down. The meeting ahead was of a highly classified nature, Thomas made it clear, and someone like Leonard had no place in it. Inside, Leonard's frustration grew as he grappled with the indignity of the situation. Never before had he been treated this way, and it was an unfamiliar and uncomfortable feeling. With no further delay, Thomas led Jeju away, and they soon found themselves seated at a dinner table with their respective associates. Thomas had been waiting a long time for this moment, and he wasted no time in making it clear. Snapping his fingers, he signaled his bodyguards. They immediately responded, bringing forward a briefcase. This was the gift Thomas had mentioned earlier, but Jeju felt indifferent. He wasn't particularly in need of anything at the moment. However, when the briefcase opened with a soft clack, everything changed. Jeju's eyes widened in surprise. Inside were 2 daggers, their blades embedded into a giant scale. Thomas proudly explained that this was his way of showing gratitude for sparing the lives of his guild members during the previous confrontation. The material of the daggers was unmistakable to Jeju, even with just a single glance. Kamish, the legendary dragon. Thomas was impressed by Jeju's quick recognition of the material, but Jeju's thoughts raced. Kamish's corpse was supposed to be kept securely by the Hunter's Bureau, yet here, in front of him, were weapons crafted from the remains of the dragon. Jeju's gaze remained fixed on the daggers, their deadly beauty a reminder of the immense power that had been contained in Kamish's fangs. Thomas explained his decision to Jeju. The American government had wanted to take possession of Kamish's corpse, believing that cooperation might yield something even more valuable than money. Thomas had complied with their wishes, but there was one part of Kamish he had kept for himself, its largest and sharpest canine tooth, a souvenir of the dragon's deadly bite during their battle. Too short to be made into a sword, he had the tooth crafted into a pair of daggers. He had no idea at the time how useful they would become, but now they served a new purpose. Thomas handed the daggers over to Jeju as a gift. Jeju pulled one of the daggers from the scale. The blade slid out effortlessly, as if waiting for this exact moment to reveal its power. As he examined the weapon, Jeju felt its weight and noticed the stats. An attack power of over 1,500. It was far beyond anything he had wielded before, making even the Demon King's daggers seem insignificant by comparison. The power radiating from the weapon was incredible, and Jeju realized that holding these daggers daggers was like wielding a broadsword in each hand. The urge to test the blade's strength surged through him. His hand tightened around the dagger, and he could feel the raw magic within it responding to him. Thomas, sensing the shift in Jenu's demeanor, let out an awkward laugh. He quickly warned Jeju, reminding him that even with his enhanced defenses, the daggers could easily penetrate them. He joked, wondering if Jeju intended to use his gift against him. Jeju calmed himself and carefully slid the dagger back into the scale. The black aura surrounding the blade dissipated, and the room seemed to exhale in relief. Laura and the bodyguards, who had been tense, visibly relaxed as the energy settled. Thomas glanced at Laura, a silent question in his eyes, asking if she still doubted his decision. Laura shook her head, confirming that it had been the right call. With a smile, Thomas asked Jeju how he liked the gift. Jeju was still in disbelief, questioning whether he could accept such a powerful item for free. Thomas, however, was firm. This wasn't a gift that came without reason. He owed Jeju for sparing his life and the lives of his guildmates. To him, these daggers were a small price to pay in comparison. Jeju finally accepted the gift, expressing his gratitude. Seeing the look of satisfaction in Jenu's eyes brought a sense of joy to Thomas as well. The moment seemed warm and fulfilling, a rare break from the intensity of their usual lives. But the peace was short-lived. Suddenly, both Jeju and Thomas froze. Their senses screamed at them. Something was wrong. Thomas turned to Jeju, his voice tense as he asked if he had felt it too. Jeju gave a brief nod. Without wasting another second, both hunters sprang from their chairs and rushed to the nearest window. Outside, the streets of Seoul had come to an eerie halt. People stood rooted in place, their faces pale and frozen in shock. Eyes were wide, mouths hung open, and not a single person moved. The entire city seemed paralyzed, captivated by the sight in the sky. Jenu's mind raced as he processed what he saw. The enormous magical energy they had sensed. This was its true form. A gate, but not just any gate. It was massive, looming over the city like a predator waiting to strike. Jeju had seen many gates before, but nothing like this. He could only wonder what kind of nightmare it held. Thomas, equally stunned, struggled to believe his eyes. He muttered in disbelief that it was the largest gate he had ever seen, far bigger than the one Kamish, the legendary dragon, had emerged from. For Thomas, this moment seemed to signal something terrifying. It was as if the world had moved beyond the boundaries of logic and entered a realm where common sense no longer applied. The colossal gate hung in the sky, trembling slightly as if it were preparing to consume everything below. Its sheer size and silent menace cast a shadow over the city, leaving a sense of dread that seemed to grow with every passing second. The appearance of the massive gate had drawn a crowd, curious onlookers gathering below it despite knowing that newly formed gates were not an immediate threat. Many in the crowd began snapping pictures with their phones, trying to capture the surreal moment. Foreign reporters had also gathered, their cameras rolling as they documented the event. Among them was Nick Powell, a seasoned reporter, broadcasting live to the world. Powell described the situation, emphasizing the unprecedented size of the gate. He pointed out the crowd's fascination mixed with unease. Though the people were out to witness the spectacle, their expressions were far from cheerful. The shadow of uncertainty hung over them. With that, Powell ended his report, signing off for BBN News. In another part of the world, Dr. Belzer, a well-known expert on magical power and gates, addressed the growing concerns. He had been warning about the enormous amount of magical energy gathering over Seoul for days. To him, this gate was only the beginning. His predictions were grim. Such gates could soon appear in other countries as well. When asked by a reporter whether these strange occurrences could happen elsewhere, Dr. Belzer confirmed it with certainty. The atmosphere was thick with concern as the interview continued. The reporter sought answers, asking the doctor what the wisest course of action would be in response to this event. But even Dr. Belzer, with all his knowledge and experience, found himself at a loss. His answer was simple yet chilling. Pray. Pray that this event would not end in tragedy. With those words, the sense of impending doom deepened. Jeju soared through the air on Kaisel, his loyal winged dragon, heading straight for the massive gate that loomed over the city. As Kaisel flew beneath it, Jeju took in the sight. It wasn't like any ordinary gate. Instead of a portal, it resembled a vast bottomless black lake, stretching into infinity. The sheer size of it was staggering, and the overwhelming magical energy it radiated would have crushed the spirit of any ordinary hunter. But for Jeju, it was nothing more than a curious sensation. As he approached the gate, a strange realization realization hit him. He couldn't enter. It felt like he was being blocked by an invisible wall. Jeju considered this unusual barrier, something not even the most powerful awakened hunters could break through. This gate was different, its nature unlike anything he had encountered before. Thoughts raced through his mind. If this gate held creatures more dangerous than any they had seen so far, then his friends, his family, everyone he cared about could be in danger. He wasn't about to let whatever was inside cross over without a fight. Suddenly, his phone vibrated in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was the call he had been waiting for. Woo Jim-chul from the Korean Hunters Association. Jeju answered, and although the reception was poor, he assured Jim-chul there was no need to call back. He was simply flying at a great height. In a calm tone, he acknowledged Jim-chul's promotion, referring to him as chairman. However, Jim-chul expressed his discomfort with the title, feeling as though the position was undeserved, and admitted to feeling awkward about it. During their conversation, Jim-chul shared the findings from the Hunters Bureau. Despite scanning the entire planet with satellite technology, there had been no signs of new gates forming anywhere else. This massive gate over Seoul was the only one. Jinu's mind raced. For the last 3 hours since the appearance of this gate, the world had remained quiet. No other gates had opened. This wasn't a coincidence. Something far bigger was at play. Jim-chul informed him that the authorities were now planning to evacuate civilians living near the gate, doing so in gradual steps to prevent chaos. The situation was tense, and everyone was preparing for the worst, but Jeju was resolute. He thought to himself that no matter what, he would stand his ground and face whatever came through that gate. Tucking his phone away, he once again inspected the massive silent gate above him. The world held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Later that day, Jeju walked into the Hunter Association gymnasium, ready for an intense training session. Facing him was Beru, his strongest shadow soldier, prepared for their sparring match. Beru moved at lightning speed, flashing toward Jeju with incredible agility. However, Jeju remained calm, effortlessly dodging each attack as Beru lunged forward, his mandibles extended in a fierce attempt to strike. Despite Beru's impressive speed, Jeju was always one step ahead, countering his movements with precision. When Beru tried to land a hit, Jeju blocked it with ease and grabbed Beru's mandibles with his bare hand, showing just how far ahead he was in terms of skill and power. For a moment, Beru was stunned, his king's speed and power far surpassing his expectations. Jeju looked at him calmly, asking if Beru was truly giving his all. Beru knelt before him, humble as always, and Jeju reassured him that this was just a way to break a sweat. He admitted that Beru was the only one capable of giving him a real challenge, words that filled Beru with deep emotion. Jeju even teased him, noticing how much better Beru had become at expressing his feelings. With the banter aside, Jeju focused on the task at hand, signaling for them to continue the sparring. This time, Beru transformed, the intensity of his black smoke increasing as his body prepared for battle. As a commander in Jeju's shadow army, Beru was at his maximum power. He leaped into the air, launching an attack with tremendous force, but Jeju was swift, dodging Beru's blows with ease. Each of Beru's strikes missed their mark, and when he threw a left hook, Jeju blocked it with his elbow effortlessly. Jeju acknowledged Beru's growth since becoming a commander, noting his increased strength. The sparring intensified as Beru pushed himself harder, his pace increasing. He tried desperately to land a blow, but Jeju continued to test both his own level and Beru's newfound strength. Despite Beru's speed, Jeju was faster. He landed a powerful left hook to Beru's chest, sending him staggering. As they continued, Jeju reminded Beru that there could only be one commander in the army. With egress and greed nearing the rank of general, it wouldn't take long for them to challenge Beru's position. Jeju's words spurred Beru into action, the fear of losing his rank driving him to fight even harder. Letting out a guttural roar, Beru increased his pace, throwing everything he had into the match. Yet despite his best efforts, he still couldn't land a single hit on Jeju. Jeju, observing the fight closely, realized that even though Beru was the strongest unit in his shadow army, he still wasn't strong enough to face the more formidable enemies they might encounter. With a swift right hand, Jeju delivered a final punch, sending Beru flying across the gymnasium and crashing into the wall. The sparring match was over. Beru, awestruck by Jeju's overwhelming power, humbly acknowledged his king's strength once again. Jeju chuckled at Beru's dramatic display, teasing him about watching too many historical dramas. Embarrassed, Beru looked at Jeju, who knew his soldier's flair for the dramatic was all part of his loyal personality. As the sparring session came to an end, Jeju glanced at the collapsed wall of the gym. His brief moment of triumph was overshadowed by the realization of the damage they had had caused. Sighing, he pulled out his phone and called Woo Jim Chul. With a nervous tone, Jeju prepared to explain. Knowing the conversation might be difficult, he decided to lead with a suggestion, mentioning the 300 ant soldiers in his army who were excellent at labor work and could handle repairs efficiently. On the other side of the city, in a hotel in Seoul, Thomas Andre, one of the most powerful hunters in the world, was staying. The atmosphere in the room was tense, yet Thomas seemed relaxed as he stood by the window, gazing out at the ominous gate looming in the distance. Its dark, foreboding presence filled the sky, casting a shadow over the city. Despite the danger it represented, Thomas found himself captivated by its sheer size and power. It was something he couldn't tear his eyes away from. Laura, his trusted assistant, stood nearby observing her master with concern. She couldn't help but wonder why Thomas had chosen to stay when others were either leaving or preparing for the worst. But to Thomas, the massive gate wasn't something to fear. It was, in his eyes, beautiful. Everything that stirred something deep within him, whether it was a fire-breathing dragon, the sight of an enormous gate, or the overwhelming strength of a hunter like Sung Ji-nu, was beautiful to him. Thomas had always pursued such things, those that took his breath away, those that symbolized power and awe. For the first time, however, Thomas was faced with something he could not have. The power behind that gate was beyond even his reach, and it intrigued him. There was no reason for him to leave. The thrill of not knowing what lay beyond the gate, of not being able to control or possess it, held him there. In his mind, there was no point in going back now. He had to see this through. Laura, always the voice of reason, reminded him that the Hunters Bureau was worried. They feared what might come, what dangers the gate might unleash upon the world. But Thomas brushed off her concerns with a calm confidence. To him, standing by Sung Ji-nu, the man who had proven his might time and again, was the safest place anyone could be. Sung Ji-nu's power was unparalleled, and Thomas had no doubt that if anyone could stand against what was coming, it would be him. But beneath his calm exterior, Thomas knew the stakes were high. His sharp gaze fixed on the gate, he pondered whether this was the end of humanity as they knew it, or the dawn of a new beginning. In the bustling streets of Seoul, the sounds of honking cars and hurried footsteps filled the air as people began to evacuate. The Hunter Association had taken control, guiding the masses to safety. Amid the chaos, Gina stood with her mother Kyung-hee, watching the crowds move from their apartment. Gina, frustrated by the situation, turned to her mother, asking if they too should be evacuating. But Kyung-hee, calm as always, reassured her. She didn't believe they needed to leave just yet. After all, their home wasn't in the designated evacuation zone, and if a battle was going to happen regardless, she preferred to choose where they would face it. Gina, full of youthful energy and dreams, couldn't hide her frustration. She had so much to look forward to: college life, newfound independence, a future she didn't want to lose. She wasn't ready to let go of all that. Kyung-hee, however, remained composed, quietly placing her faith in Ji-nu, her son. She was confident he would protect them just as her husband had once done. Ji-nu had become their shield, their hope. Meanwhile, Ji-nu sat on top of a tall building, deep in thought. The looming gate in the distance cast an eerie shadow over the city. His mind raced as he tried to sense the enemies he knew were hiding. Despite the chaos below, they hadn't revealed themselves yet, and the silence troubled him. The gate was growing more dangerous by the minute, and Ji-nu knew he had to stop it, but the weight of protecting so many people was heavy on his shoulders. Could he do it without anyone getting hurt? He scrolled through the contacts on his phone, contemplating who he would spend his final moments with if this battle truly became his last. Thoughts of friends passed through his mind, but one name stood out: Cha Hae-in. At the same time, in a quiet dojo, Cha Hae-in was immersed in her training. Her wooden sword sliced through the air as she practiced, her uniform soaked in sweat from the intensity of her routine. Sung Cheol, the master of the dojo, watched her closely. He could sense something in her movements, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. He wondered if fear was beginning to take hold in her heart. After all, she had faced terrifying monsters, and even he, a seasoned veteran, had known fear in his battles. Hae-in's phone suddenly buzzed, interrupting her training. She paused and quickly answered. After a brief conversation, she turned to Cheol, an urgent expression on her face. Something had come up, and she needed to leave immediately. Cheol, understanding, nodded and watched as she left the dojo with a renewed sense of purpose. As she hurried away, Cheol smiled to himself. He realized what had just happened. There was something more than battle that stirred Hae-in's heart, something that gave her strength. Whatever it was enough to lift her spirit, and Cheol couldn't help but admire that quiet determination. The amusement park was buzzing with activity, packed with weekend visitors enjoying their time under the clear sky. Among the crowd, a few sharp-eyed individuals quickly recognized a familiar figure. Whispers spread rapidly rapidly, and soon many eyes were drawn towards Sung Jinu as he walked through the park. Some couldn't believe what they were seeing. People pointed in awe, surprised to see the powerful hunter casually strolling through the amusement park. A few even wondered about the woman walking beside him. She was none other than Cha Hae-in, a well-known hunter from the Hunters Guild, but the way she was walking next to Jinu raised questions about their relationship. Whispers about whether she was his girlfriend filled the air. Jinu, glancing around, took in the sight of the crowd. It was much larger than he had expected, considering the dangerous situation looming over the city. Despite the looming threat of the gate, people seemed determined to enjoy their weekend. He found it surprising, but didn't dwell on it for long. Beside him, Cha Hae-in lowered her head slightly and spoke quietly, asking if he liked places like this. Jinu, his expression calm, admitted that he didn't particularly have a fondness for such places, but there had always been a small part of him that wanted to experience an amusement park at least once. It was something simple, something he hadn't been able to do in his past life. Hae-in seemed a bit puzzled by his words. Why bring her along to a place he had merely been curious about? But Jinu, with a subtle smile, told her she was his only friend. He brought up the memory of their encounter in front of that strange statue, the one where Hae-in had said something quite unexpected. As she recalled the moment, her cheeks flushed, the embarrassment clear on her face. She hadn't realized he had been listening to that conversation. Jinu teased her lightly, revealing that he had good hearing, much to her surprise. But the mystery of that dungeon still lingered. Hae-in, curious, asked what that strange place had been. Jinu's expression became thoughtful as he admitted he wasn't entirely sure either. It was something he needed more time to think about before he could give her an answer. Hae-in nodded in understanding, glancing around as the crowd grew more excited. People began calling out, waving in their direction, eager to catch a glimpse of the famous hunter Sung Jinu. Some shouted, asking for his attention, while others expressed their admiration, hoping for a moment of acknowledgement. Jinu's elite knights, his loyal and powerful bodyguards, emerged from the shadows without a sound. They formed a protective circle around Jinu and Hae-in, shielding them from the growing crowd. Hae-in couldn't help but smile at the sight, though she wondered if this might attract even more attention. Hae-in thought about how long it had been since she felt this lighthearted, casually walking through a public space. It had been 2 years since she became a hunter, and her life had been filled with responsibilities and battles. But now, with Jinu by her side, there was something different in the air. She found herself feeling at ease, a calmness she hadn't known for a long time. There was something about his presence that made everything around her feel less heavy, almost like a unique fragrance that only he carried. Jinu's eyes scanned the various rides and attractions around them, and then he pointed at a tall drop tower. His suggestion was simple. Did she want to try that ride? Hae-in agreed quickly, her answer coming without hesitation. Then Jinu pointed to another ride, and Hae-in nodded again, ready for that one as well. He kept suggesting different rides, and each time Hae-in was more than happy to agree. Jinu realized that she too had likely been wanting to come to a place like this, to experience something outside of the usual battles and challenges of their hunter lives. He decided then, if Hae-in wanted to try everything, they would ride every single attraction. The two of them secured a front seat on one of the roller coasters. As the ride began, the people behind them screamed and laughed, but Jinu, with his incredible abilities, found the experience rather dull. Everything around him seemed to move in slow motion, even as the roller coaster sped up and twisted through its loops. After wandering around the park, they decided to grab some snacks. As they sat down, Jinu asked Hae-in if she was enjoying herself. She assured him that she was, but he had noticed something. She hadn't screamed once, even on the wildest of rides. Jinu, thinking about it, realized that for two S-class hunters like them, these rides were probably too slow to be thrilling. He asked if she also found the rides a bit too slow, and Hae-in, somewhat flustered, admitted that she did. Jinu glanced at Hae-in, suggesting that they go and experience something truly fun. She seemed confused by his words, unsure of what he meant. But before long, the answer became clear as they soared high above the clouds. The wind rushing past them, Kaisel, Jinu's majestic dragon, flapped its enormous wings, carrying them through the sky at incredible speed. Hae-in, feeling the wind whipping through her hair, couldn't help but be overwhelmed by the thrill of it all. She took in the height, the speed, and then something even more. It was beautiful. As Kaisel gradually slowed down, they found themselves hovering over the ocean. The warm breeze from the sea gently brushed against their faces, and the sky before them was painted in hues of orange and gold as the sun began to sink into the horizon. The scene was breathtaking, filled with the quiet peace of nature. Hae-in, still in awe, turned to Jinu, wondering aloud why he had chosen to go to an amusement park when he could experience something like this. Jinu explained that the amusement park held special significance significance. It had been built on the very gate where his father had vanished. It was a place he had always wanted to visit, at least once. Hearing this, Ahjin didn't respond with words. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him in a quiet embrace, her warmth pressed against his back. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed everything she felt: gratitude, compassion, and perhaps even a silent farewell. She wanted to express how much his kindness and generosity had meant to her. Jeju, feeling her closeness, mentioned that he still had something left to show her. They flew for a great distance, crossing vast landscapes until they arrived in Japan. The area they landed in was completely desolate, a restricted zone where no humans lived, and even the animals had fled from the overwhelming presence of magic beasts. The land was covered in an endless stretch of trees, silent and untouched. Ahjin, having just experienced something so extraordinary, looked around with high expectations, but there was nothing to see. Just the quiet expanse of nature and the sea of stars above them. Despite the simplicity of the scene, she sighed, taking it all in. There was a beauty to it, something that words couldn't fully capture. As they stood together under the vast night sky, countless stars shimmered above them. Ahjin rested her head gently on Jeju's shoulder, the two of them quietly entwined as the stars cast their soft glow over the moment, wrapping them in the serene stillness of the night. The sun rose higher, shining brighter than usual, illuminating a secluded forest where magic energy flowed through the world, unnoticed by most humans. Near a serene waterfall, Ahjin carefully surveyed the area, her movements quiet and calculated. She bent down to take a drink from the cool water, the gentle morning breeze brushing her cheeks with a soft touch. Somewhere in the distance, Jeju sensed that Ahjin had awakened. Knowing of a nearby hotel that offered a good breakfast, Jeju proposed they head there for a meal and a chance to wash up. Ahjin agreed, and without hesitation, Jeju summoned Kaisel. As the mighty beast spread its wings, ready to soar, Ahjin tilted her head in curiosity, wondering aloud why they needed to fly if the place was so close. Jeju casually mentioned that he could run the distance in 5 minutes at full speed, causing Ahjin to silently marvel at his incredible abilities. She wondered how many kilometers could he truly cover in that short time. Soon they were airborne, Kaisel gliding smoothly through the sky toward their destination. Outside the Hunter Association of Korea, the air was thick with tension. A middle-aged man, a hunter, had just exited the headquarters after his evaluation. He had been promoted to a B-rank hunter, a significant step up in his career. Feeling proud, he reminded himself not to let his guard down. This was no time for complacency. As he walked, something unexpected happened. A figure seemed to appear out of nowhere, colliding with his shoulder. The B-rank hunter froze, immediately turning to see who had bumped into him. His eyes widened as he looked up. He was now face to face with a giant man standing nearly 7 feet tall. The man's hulking presence towered over him, casting an ominous shadow. The sudden encounter quickly drew the attention of passers-by. People gathered, their curiosity piqued by the scene unfolding before them. They whispered among themselves, wondering if a fight was about to break out. The towering man was huge, even larger than the well-known hunter Ma Dong-wook, and many assumed he must also be a hunter. But there was a sense of unease. The onlookers couldn't help but feel that the B-rank hunter was in over his head. The B-rank hunter, emboldened by his recent promotion, yelled at the hulking figure. His pride swelled as he remembered his own rise through the ranks. He was no longer the same person who once cowered before others. He demanded an apology, his voice raised, believing that as a B-rank, he now commanded respect. He felt empowered, no longer willing to be stepped on by others. But before he could finish speaking, the giant figure moved. His mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp, shark-like teeth. His eyes glowed a menacing red, and the terror he emitted was beyond anything the onlookers had ever felt. It was primal, instinctual, an overpowering fear that gripped their very souls. In an instant, the beastly figure devoured the hunter whole, leaving only blood and shredded remains in his wake. The creature, still grinning with blood dripping from its mouth, reveled in the chaos it had caused. Without warning, the monstrous figure unleashed its fury on everything around it. Cars were flung into the air, debris scattered across the streets. One of the hunters nearby was caught off guard, staring wide-eyed as a car hurtled toward him. He had no time to react. The vehicle smashed into him with such force that his body was obliterated, leaving nothing behind. The beast unleashed a thunderous roar, its voice echoing with raw power and menace. Though the language was foreign, the threat was unmistakable. This was no ordinary creature. It was the king of beasts, the beast Monarch. His blood-soaked grin twisted into a savage declaration. From this moment on, the hunt would begin. He vowed to tear through the humans before him. him, ripping their flesh apart with his merciless teeth and claws. His challenge rang out like a death sentence, daring anyone, if they had the courage, to stop the carnage he was about to unleash. Back in Seoul, the atmosphere at the Hunter Association was tense. President Woo Jim-chul had just received alarming news. A terrifying creature had appeared downtown without warning, and chaos had ensued. Jim-chul, managing the crisis, urgently demanded an update on the situation. His associate reported that the number of casualties was still unknown, and the monstrous creature's rampage was far from over. With a dungeon break looming, there were only a few hours left before things could get even worse. Frustration filled Woo Jim-chul as he grappled with the escalating crisis. His mind raced, already overwhelmed by the looming threat of the dungeon, and now this beast had emerged from nowhere. He quickly inquired about Sung Jinu's whereabouts, but no one had been able to contact the powerful hunter. With growing concern, Jim-chul braced himself, knowing that if the worst-case scenario unfolded, he might have to step up and confront the beast himself. Just as he was lost in thought, an employee rushed into the room, breathless, announcing that a hunter capable of facing the monster had appeared. Jim-chul's heart skipped a beat as he leapt from his seat, hoping it was Jinu. But the hunter wasn't Jinu. Instead, it was a world-class hunter who had happened to be nearby. Leonard Nerman, Germany's strongest hunter, stood firm, feeling the approach of a monstrous presence as it left a trail of blood in its wake. A wave of doubt washed over him as he wondered if he could truly face this threat. The thought crept into his mind. Was he destined to meet this beast here in Seoul? Perhaps fate had placed him in this city to stop the rampaging creature. With a grim face, Leonard unbuttoned the top of his shirt, preparing himself for the battle ahead. But before he could take a step toward the monster, a deep voice called out from behind him. Thomas Andre, the world-class hunter, appeared, towering over Leonard with his massive frame. His command was clear. Leonard needed to back off, or he would only get in the way. In another part of the world, far from the chaos of Seoul, a peaceful morning unfolded. A fresh hot breakfast was being served at a quiet restaurant, and the tranquility seemed unbroken until Jinu's phone began ringing non-stop, breaking the silence. Jinu quickly answered the call. It was Woo Jim-chul, the head of the Korean Hunter Association, frantically explaining that a monster was wreaking havoc in the middle of Seoul. Jinu, surprised, questioned the timing, as they still had days before the scheduled dungeon break of the gigantic gate. But Jim-chul confirmed the truth. A single monster was annihilating everything in its path, and even an entire guild had been wiped out instantly. This wasn't just any ordinary beast. Jinu's mind raced. He had stationed his shadow soldiers with the hunters in Seoul, tasked to report back to him at the slightest sign of trouble. How could such devastation occur, and yet he hadn't received any warning? Something was wrong, very wrong. He tried to connect with his shadow soldiers, but the signal was faint, almost as if something was deliberately interfering with it. Without wasting a moment, Jinu activated Shadow Exchange, attempting to teleport to the location of the shadow soldier he had placed near Thomas Andre. But a notification appeared, startling him. The designated shadow soldier could not be found. He tried multiple times, only to receive the same result each time. Jinu's thoughts grew darker. An enemy of overwhelming power had emerged, and the world-class hunter Thomas Andre was already standing against it. But the disrupted signals and the disappearance of his shadow soldiers hinted at something even more terrifying. Jinu asked Jim-chul to confirm one critical detail. Did the monster have a shadow? Jim-chul, after checking a photograph, confirmed Jinu's worst fear. The beast didn't have a shadow. This monster had concealed itself, hiding away from the watchful eyes of the shadows. Meanwhile, Leonard watched as Thomas Andre strode confidently toward the beast, his massive figure blocking out the light like a mountain. The hunters nearby looked on in awe, recognizing the legendary figure before them. Thomas, sensing the urgency of the situation, ordered them to begin rescuing the citizens without hesitation. His gaze turned cold as he approached the beast, which, though resembling a human, was clearly something far more dangerous, an otherworldly creature soaked in blood. Thomas's icy glare cut through the chaos as he readied himself for battle. Without warning, Rakan, the beast monarch, made the first move. His deadly claws lashed out, aiming straight for Thomas's chest. The claws raked across his skin, but Thomas remained unshaken, his focus locked on his opponent. Bam! Thomas unleashed a devastating punch, snapping Rakan's head to the side with bone-crushing force. The shockwave of the blow rippled through the beast monarch's entire body. Without hesitation, Thomas followed up with another earth-shattering strike, but a twisted grin appeared on Rakan's face. Yet Thomas wasn't done. He swung again, but this time Rakan narrowly dodged, barely escaping the hit. Undeterred, Thomas drove another powerful blow, slamming the beast monarch into the ground with brutal force. The impact shattered the earth beneath them, sending debris flying across the battlefield, marking the sheer intensity of their clash. As the clash between the two titans unfolded, Choi Jong-gin, the guildmaster of the Hunters Guild, arrived on the scene. He stepped out of his car and immediately assessed the situation. His thoughts turned to the evacuation efforts. He knew that hunters from various guilds, including the Fiend Guild and White Tiger Guild, were already working to clear the area. But his attention was drawn to the immense battle unfolding between Thomas Andre and the Beast Monarch. Jong-gin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This presence, this monster, felt even more menacing than the one they had encountered during the Jeju Island raid. As powerful as Thomas Andre was, Jong-gin couldn't help but wonder just what kind of creature they were up against. Meanwhile, Thomas continued his relentless assault on the Beast Monarch. Blow after blow landed with incredible force, gradually pushing the beast back. With a full-powered swing, Thomas landed a devastating punch that sent Rakan flying across the asphalt, tearing the road apart as he skidded uncontrollably before crashing into a nearby building. Suddenly, pieces of metal shot out like missiles, slicing through the cloud of dust. Rakan, the Beast Monarch, moved with blinding speed, charging toward Thomas with deadly intent. In a split second, his head struck Thomas's torso with relentless force. But Thomas stood unshaken, anchoring his foot into the ground, prepared to meet the attack head-on. He absorbed the impact and in a split second, grabbed Rakan by the waist. With a display of raw power, Thomas swung the beast into the air and delivered a devastating suplex, smashing Rakan's head into the ground with enough force to crack the earth beneath them. The impact was immense, but Rakan was far from defeated. In a flash, the Beast Monarch retaliated with a powerful kick, his foot connecting with Thomas's face. The force sent Thomas flying into the air like a missile, while Rakan gracefully landed on his feet, a menacing grin spreading across his face as he savored the brief advantage. Thomas, undeterred, landed back on his feet, his glare never leaving Rakan. The Goliath activated his reinforcement skill, enhancing his power even further, preparing for the next round. From a distance, Baek-en-ho, the leader of the White Tiger Guild, watched the titanic clash unfold. He realized that this was the subjugation site they had been preparing for. Suddenly, Rakan's body crashed into the ground not far from Baek, sending shockwaves through the earth. Baek's eyes widened in disbelief. The sheer force of the impact was unlike anything he had ever seen. Was this the magical beast that had been reported? And if so, the man standing against it had to be none other than Thomas Andre, the Goliath. Baek felt a mix of admiration and fear as he watched the fight. He yelled out words of encouragement to Thomas, but Thomas's response was fierce and commanding. He ordered Baek and the other hunters to take cover, knowing the battle was far from over. Rakan, with his jaws wide open, radiated murderous intent, his presence alone enough to strike terror into those nearby. Baek felt an overwhelming sense of dread. This was no ordinary monster. He had never encountered anything like it before. His instincts screamed at him to stay hidden, to avoid drawing attention to himself. The animalistic sixth sense within him recognized the struggle of prey, trying not to be noticed by a predator. Just as Baek was contemplating his next move, Rakan appeared directly in front of him. Baek froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't even muster the courage to look the Beast Monarch in the eye. The sheer weight of Rakan's magic power was suffocating, a terrifying force unlike anything Baek had felt in a decade. As Rakan walked past him, Baek trembled. The terror in his heart was undeniable. This was a creature far beyond the ordinary, a force of destruction that seemed unstoppable. Rakan extended his claws, and with a mysterious skill, the entire area around him seemed to defy gravity. Every car, every lamppost, even the fire hydrants and benches were uprooted and floating in the air as if pulled by an invisible force. The sheer power of Rakan's skill caused chunks of metal to shoot out like missiles, swirling through the thick cloud of dust. Thomas Andre remained unfazed. As cars and debris flew at him, he kicked them aside effortlessly, maintaining his focus on the beast. Using his own skill, gravitation, Thomas drew the thrashing Rakan toward him. The air trembled as the force of Thomas's power intensified. In a split second, Rakan was right in front of Thomas, his snarling face only inches away. Without hesitation, Thomas unleashed his most powerful skill, Demolish. His muscles bulged and expanded, veins popping as his arms seemed ready to explode from the raw force gathering within them. With both fists raised, Thomas brought them down with crushing force onto Rakan's back. The impact was catastrophic. A massive shockwave ripped through the battlefield, driving the Beast Monarch deep into the earth. But Thomas wasn't done yet. He leaped toward the fallen beast and began pummeling him relentlessly, each punch delivered with the full might of his skill. Heavy blow. Each strike hit its target with a sickening thud. Thomas's fists moved like hammers, raining down on Rakan with overwhelming force. Yet despite having the upper hand, a strange unease began to gnaw at Thomas. Sweat trickled down his face, and his body trembled, not from exertion, but from an unsettling feeling growing deep inside him. Something wasn't right. Thomas couldn't understand it. He was dominating the fight, every hit connecting, every blow more powerful than the last. Rakan wasn't even resisting, but then the realization struck him like a cold wave. It was Rakan's eyes. Throughout the entire battle, Rakan's gaze hadn't changed. His eyes, cold and unblinking, stared at Thomas with a disturbing calm. Thomas, filled with fury, raised his fist high into the air, but as he swung his fist down, aiming to crush Rakan, the beast Monarch, something went terribly wrong. Rakan, with ease, blocked Thomas's strike with just one hand. The impact that should have shattered the beast barely made him flinch. A chill crept down Thomas's spine as his eyes widened in disbelief. His fists, so powerful just moments ago, were now immobilized, held firmly by the beast. Suddenly, a transformation began. Rakan's black hair turned white, growing longer and wilder, and his body began to change. His nails grew into deadly claws, his teeth sharpened into fangs, and his entire body became covered in white fur. Thomas, still frozen in shock, didn't know how to react. The beast in front of him had become even more terrifying than before. Without warning, Rakan launched a devastating attack. His claws moved at lightning speed, slashing at Thomas with brutal force. The pain was unbearable, and for the first time, one of the world's most powerful hunters let out a cry of anguish. Thomas's voice echoed across the battlefield as he struggled to defend himself, but the assault was relentless. Just as Rakan prepared to strike again, something caught his eye. A shadow ant had emerged from the darkness, moving quietly through the chaos. Rakan reacted immediately, grabbing the creature by its neck, lifting it effortlessly off the ground. The beast's eyes narrowed as he examined the ant, his grip tightening. With barely a thought, Rakan crushed the shadow ant in his hand, its form dissipating into thin air. Rakan dismissed it, turning his attention back to Thomas, who was now on his knees, struggled to keep himself upright. Rakan's grip tightened around Thomas's neck, his voice mocking as he taunted the hunter. With his overwhelming strength, Rakan invited a contest of power, confident in his superiority. Thomas, though battered, wasn't ready to back down. He managed to position himself behind the beast, locking Rakan into a headlock, determined to end the fight on his terms. Thomas's mind screamed defiance as he tightened his grip around the beast monarch's neck, trying to gain control, but Rakan, unfazed, narrowed his eyes, his expression turning cold and menacing. The beast's muscles flexed as he clenched his jaw, and the sound of bones cracking followed in an instant. Thomas, caught in the surge of adrenaline, didn't immediately feel the agony, but when it hit him, the pain was unbearable. A blood-curdling scream escaped Thomas's lips as Rakan shattered the arm wrapped around his neck. The sheer force left Thomas powerless. The beast monarch then grabbed Thomas by the head, lifting him like a rag doll before slamming him violently into the ground. The impact was devastating, shaking the earth beneath them. Rakan, relentless, leaped on top of Thomas's now prone body, his iron grip still on the hunter's head. With a sinister grin, Rakan spoke with chilling cruelty, hinting at his hunger, ready to devour his fallen opponent. Thomas, who had once stood tall and proud, now lay cold and broken beneath the weight of the beast. Just as Rakan prepared to finish him off, a sudden blast of magical energy shot through the air, striking the beast monarch square in the face. The impact was strong enough to knock Rakan off Thomas, momentarily halting the onslaught. It was Leonard attacking from a distance, his eyes filled with determination as he stepped forward. Leonard positioned himself beside the fallen Thomas, unwavering despite the terrifying power of the beast monarch. His heart pounded in his chest, every instinct telling him to run, but he stood firm. Leonard knew he couldn't allow the creature to have its way, even if fear gripped him with every passing second. As he faced Rakan, a chill ran down his spine, yet he steeled himself for the battle ahead, knowing that retreat was not an option. Thomas recognized Leonard hovering over his body and attempted to warn him. His voice was weak as he told the German hunter to run away, insisting that staying would mean death. But Leonard, trembling, shook his head in defiance. Despite the overwhelming danger, he stood his ground, knowing full well what was at stake. In his mind, Leonard was resolute. He had no regrets. Even if this moment marked the end of his life, he would make the same choice over and over again. A proud death was far better than living a meaningless life. His body quivered with fear as he repeated those thoughts, convincing himself that he had made the right decision. But as Rakan, the terrifying beast monarch, stepped closer, jaws wide open and ready to devour him, Leonard's fear overwhelmed him. The German hunter's resolve wavered, his eyes wide in terror. His mind raced with doubt as the monstrous figure drew nearer, the threat of death becoming all too real. In that fleeting moment, Leonard realized he had made the wrong choice. His body froze as Rakan lunged toward him, jaws ready to tear him apart. But then, a sudden gust of wind whipped past Leonard. His eyes snapped open at the sound of a powerful impact ahead of him. Rakan, who had been seconds away from ending Leonard's life, was blasted away, thrown dozens of meters through the air by an unexpected force. The beast tumbled to the ground from the blow delivered by Kaisel, the shadow dragon who had entered the fray. Kaisel's massive jaws had clamped onto Rakan and dragged him right out of his path of destruction. Leonard stood in shock, watching in disbelief. Relief washed over him as he saw the monstrous Rakan struggling, now suspended in midair. Kaisel's shadow form began to dissipate, vanishing into thin air, leaving Rakan alone, but still grinning with a menacing delight. Rakan's gaze followed the swirling shadows, his heart pounding as something descended rapidly from above. Sung Jeju, the hunter, launched himself at Rakan with flawless precision. In a stunning acrobatic move, Jeju struck Rakan with a devastating leg kick, landing the blow right on top of the Beast Monarch's head. The impact was deafening. The ground beneath Rakan shattered from the force, the asphalt cracking as cars were pushed aside and streetlights bent under the sheer pressure. Jeju landed gracefully beside Leonard, the situation firmly under his control. Leonard, still in a daze from the rapid events, glanced at Jeju with wide eyes, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. Jeju, calm and composed, politely requested Leonard's help to carry Thomas to safety. Leonard quickly assisted the injured Thomas, carefully supporting him as they rushed away from the battlefield. Meanwhile, Jeju's focus shifted back to the Beast Monarch, Rakan, who was slowly rising from the debris. Jeju could feel the intense killing intent radiating from him, but something else weighed on his mind, the presence of more than one threat. As Jeju stood deep in thought, the massive figure of Rakan finally emerged from the rubble. The beast seemed unfazed by the brutal impact he had just endured. Rakan sloshed something in his mouth, and with a sneer, he spat out broken teeth, his eyes locked onto Jeju. Rakan, now more aware of Jeju's power, recognized something familiar. The beast's voice echoed as he expressed his realization. He could sense the presence of the Shadow Monarch within Jeju, and the revelation seemed to enrage him. To Rakan, Jeju was not just an ordinary human, but something far more dangerous, someone who had somehow harnessed the power of a superior being. As Jeju and Rakan stared each other down, another voice interrupted. It was cold and filled with malice. The Frost Monarch appeared beside Rakan, confirming Rakan's suspicions. He mentioned the Shadow Monarch's deal with an administrator, suggesting that Jeju's power was no accident but a planned outcome. The explanation only seemed to fuel the tension. Before Jeju could react, another sinister presence made itself known. From the shadows, a swarm of insects began pouring out from the sewers. The buzzing of thousands of tiny wings filled the air, and the insects quickly gathered, transforming into the menacing form of the Queen of Insects. She was curious and eager, her sharp gaze focused entirely on Jeju. Her voice was full of twisted excitement as she pondered what it would be like to devour another monarch. Jeju's expression darkened as enemies began to surround him. He wasn't facing just one opponent anymore, but three powerful monarchs: the Beast Monarch, the Frost Monarch, and the Plague Monarch. Notifications from the system flickered before him, confirming his fears. Each monarch had marked him as their enemy. The black heart within Jeju responded immediately to the presence of such overwhelming power, pumping wildly inside him. It was as if his entire being was now alive with energy. The thundering heartbeat filled his chest. But despite the dire situation, Jeju's lips curled into a smirk. His eyes flashed coldly. With a simple command, Jeju summoned his shadow army. The shadows rose from the ground, an army encircling him, ready to face the three monarchs. The Frost Monarch stood calmly, as Igris, Jeju's loyal knight, charged toward him at full speed. Right beside Igris was Iron, both closing in for a joint attack. On the other side, Tank and Jima roared as they launched themselves at the Beast Monarch. The air trembled as the ant soldiers moved in unison, heading straight for the Plague Monarch. Rakan, the Beast Monarch, growled with amusement as he observed the vast shadow army before him. His voice echoed with surprise and curiosity at the sight, but the Frost Monarch remained unmoved. Stepping forward with a chilling calm, he prepared to unleash his power. The Frost Monarch took a slow, deep breath, then released a bone-chilling wind that swept across the battlefield. The icy air crackled, and everything it touched froze instantly. The street, once bustling with Jeju's shadow army, was now encased in solid ice, a frozen wasteland stretching as far as the eye could see. Jeju Jeju could feel the cold pressing against him as the storm of ice rushed toward him, but with lightning-fast reflexes, he raised his daggers, Kamish's wrath in hand, blocking the powerful onslaught. The cold bit at him, trying to force him back, but he held his ground, not allowing the frost to overwhelm him. Jeju's shadow army, which had been ready for battle moments ago, was now frozen in place. The soldiers stood motionless, trapped within the ice prison that had engulfed the battlefield. The Frost Monarch watched, unimpressed, as his cold power immobilized the army. His voice echoed across the frozen street, filled with mockery. He dismissed Jeju's soldiers, calling them nothing more than small fries. To him, they were weak, unable to move even a single step inside the icy prison. His cold arrogance showed as he belittled Jeju's attempt to stand against the Monarchs. Beside him, Queretia, the Plague Monarch, added her own twisted words. She lamented the fate of her insect children, now trapped alongside Jeju's shadow soldiers. She spoke with a chilling calmness, as if seeing them again after so long stirred some dark, unsettling emotion within her. The Frost Monarch, unfazed by her comments, continued to mock Jeju. He found it ridiculous that Jeju thought he could use these frozen soldiers to stand in the way of the Monarchs. It was insulting, and worse, the fact that Jeju, a mere human, believed he had absorbed the full power of the Shadow Monarch was laughable. While the Shadow Monarch had once been the greatest among them, they believed they could not be underestimated. Despite the frozen battlefield and the overwhelming power of his enemies, Jeju's anger did not subside. The setback only fueled his rage. His gaze locked onto the Frost Monarch, his target clear. Gripping Kamish's wrath, he pointed the blade directly at the Frost Monarch, his expression dark and full of fury. Jeju's voice was cold and resolute. He didn't care about the other monarchs at that moment. His rage was focused on one goal. He would kill the Frost Monarch, no matter what. The Frost Monarch grimaced, the shoulder wound Jeju had inflicted earlier seeming to pulse with pain. He was enraged, and with a quick motion of his hands, he summoned golems from the ice-covered ground. Massive, towering figures of ice and stone began to rise, ready to crush anything in their path. At the same time, Queretia, the queen of insects, whistled, bringing the battlefield's corpses to life. The lifeless bodies scattered across the ground began to crack and twist, their bones snapping and reshaping themselves into grotesque, four-legged creatures that scuttled toward Jeju like spiders. Jeju's eyes narrowed. The human spider abominations were upon him in an instant, but he reacted even faster. Time seemed to slow down as his twin daggers, Kamish's wrath, slashed through the air with precision. One by one, the creatures that leaped toward him were sliced cleanly in half, their bisected bodies falling lifeless to the ground. As Jeju dispatched the creatures, a massive ice golem advanced on him. The towering figure lifted its colossal foot, aiming to crush Jeju beneath its weight, but Jeju was quicker. In a flash, he moved faster than light itself, leaping onto the golem's back. With one swift motion, he sliced its head clean in two, sending the massive figure crumbling to the ground, its shattered remains scattering around him. Two more golems lunged at Jeju, their icy claws reaching out to tear him apart, but he had already anticipated their attack. In an instant, he pierced through them with such speed and force that they shattered into countless pieces, reduced to nothing but debris. Using ruler's authority, Jeju hurled himself toward the Frost Monarch like a bullet. Moving so fast that the Frost Monarch was caught off guard, Jeju appeared right in front of him in the blink of an eye, his daggers raised and ready to strike. But just as Kamish's wrath was about to make contact, something intercepted the blow. It was the Beast Monarch, Rakan, who had blocked the strike with his wrist. Rakan's confidence showed as he stood tall, believing that no mere blade could harm him. But Jeju's dagger sliced clean through Rakan's wrist, severing it from his arm. A spray of fluid splattered across the battlefield as the beast let out a roar of disbelief, stunned by what had just happened. Jeju's weapon wasn't just any piece of metal, it was far more powerful than the Beast Monarch had realized. Before Rakan could fully comprehend what had occurred, Jeju sensed another threat. He glanced up just in time to see the Queen of Insects preparing to strike. Her punch infused with magical power barreled toward him. With barely a moment to spare, Jeju dodged the attack, and the shockwave from her punch obliterated the human spiders that had been nearby. Queretia stood firm, surrounding herself with a menacing magical force, ready to continue the fight. Meanwhile, Rakan began reattaching his severed wrist, the tendons and bones fusing back together as if nothing had happened. Jeju exhaled, realizing the battle was far from over. He would have to start all over again. The battlefield was filled with chaos as the golems controlled by the enraged Frost Monarch, the human spider hybrids manipulated by the Plague Monarch, and the Beast Monarch, whose arm had fully regenerated, all advanced toward Jeju in perfect unison. Just as the situation seemed dire, a loud crack echoed behind him. Jeju heard a voice that filled him with a sudden rush of relief. disbelief. It was Beru, the powerful ant commander, Jeju's loyal shadow soldier, had broken free. Beru's instinct to protect his king overwhelmed every other thought in his mind. He had entered an emergency state, his focus solely on defending Jeju. His wings buzzed furiously as he launched himself into the air, flying straight toward Jeju with a speed that left the other monarchs stunned. Beru's piercing cry echoed through the streets of Seoul, shaking the entire area with its intensity. The Frost Monarch stood in disbelief, shocked that one of Jeju's shadow soldiers had broken through his binding spell. This was no ordinary soldier. Beru, a commander-level entity, was a force of destruction, and to see him under the control of a human was nothing short of astonishing. Even the Beast Monarch, usually confident in his overwhelming strength, was momentarily shaken. He knew the power of a commander-level shadow soldier, acknowledging that Beru was like a god of destruction, a terrifying force on the battlefield. The Plague Monarch, however, was unfazed. She looked at Beru with disdain, determined to punish the disobedient ant who dared to defy her. Stretching out her hand, she attempted to grab Beru out of the air, intending to crush him. But Beru was not one to back down. With fierce determination and a speed that defied the monarch's expectations, he darted toward the Queen of Insects' outstretched hand. In a moment of pure rage and instinct, Beru let out a deafening screech that tore through the queen's hand, shredding it with ease. The force of his attack left the monarchs in disbelief. With his enemy momentarily subdued, Beru quickly returned to Jeju's side. Landing gracefully, he knelt before his king, his loyalty and determination to protect Jeju unwavering. He spoke with admiration for Jeju's strength. His words, though dramatic, carried a sense of pride for the power his king displayed. However, Jeju couldn't focus on the praise for long. As Beru's words filled the air, the dead corpses nearby moved swiftly, racing toward them. Beru, ever alert, shifted into attack mode, ripping apart the oncoming threats in an instant. His fierce movements protected Jeju from the immediate danger, but both of them were briefly caught off guard. In the chaos, Jeju turned, only to be met with the looming shadow of a massive palm descending toward him. The Queen of Insects had launched a sudden attack, swatting Jeju like a mere insect. The force of the blow was immense. Jeju was thrown into the side of a building, the impact causing the entire structure to tremble. The shockwave rippled through the surrounding area, shaking other buildings as well. Jeju struggled out of the debris, his body aching from the collision. His breath came in heavy gasps, and he felt the world spinning around him. Dizzy and disoriented, his ears rang, and his vision blurred for a moment. But there was no time to rest. As Jeju regained his focus, he looked up to see a terrifying sight. A hail of ice arrows, thousands of them floating above him. They had been conjured by the Frost Monarch, each arrow sharp and deadly, aimed directly at him. Without hesitation, Jeju braced himself. His movements were a blur as he deflected the arrows raining down on him, his speed so quick that he seemed to vanish and reappear in flashes. The Frost Monarch watched, impressed by Jeju's resilience, but confident in his strategy. He taunted Jeju, wondering how long the human could withstand the relentless onslaught from multiple sides. Yet before the Frost Monarch could finish his thought, something unexpected happened. A sudden sharp pain pierced through the Frost Monarch's chest. His eyes widened in disbelief as he looked down to find a dagger lodged deep in his body. Confusion washed over him. How had Jeju gotten so close without him noticing? Jeju stood before him. His voice was calm, his gaze unwavering. Jeju had promised him that he wouldn't leave this battlefield alive, and Jeju intended to keep that promise. The Frost Monarch's blood surged with fury. How could a mere human inflict harm upon one of the monarchs? As the dagger embedded in his chest, Jeju quickly summoned it back, watching the blade return to his hand after having pierced the monarch's heart. Despite the direct hit, Jeju knew that such a wound wasn't fatal to these powerful beings. The monarchs were resilient beyond normal comprehension. Without hesitation, Jeju spun Kamish's wrath into a reverse grip and unleashed a flurry of attacks. His swift movements left sharp cuts in the air, slicing through everything in their vicinity. The clashing sound of blades echoed as Jeju pushed forward, aiming to break the Frost Monarch's defenses. His speed was incredible, faster than anyone could have expected. But Jeju wasn't alone. Behind him, Rakan, the Beast Monarch, moved just as quickly. Silently summoning his weapon, Rakan followed Jeju's every move, waiting for the right moment. With a brutal strike, Rakan slashed across Jeju's back, delivering a devastating blow. The impact was so fierce that Jeju staggered, coughing up blood from the force of the attack. From a distance, Beru watched in horror. His king had been struck, and despite his best efforts, he was powerless to intervene. The plague monarch Queresha had pinned Beru down under her foot. No matter how hard he struggled, Beru couldn't break free from her grip. Queresha, the queen of insects, introduced herself with cold pride. She claimed to be the mother of every insect in existence, and despite Beru's defiance, she still saw him as one of her own. Trapped beneath her crushing weight, Beru roared in anger, but it was no use. He couldn't protect his king in this state. As Jeju struggled to regain his footing, Rakan prepared to deliver the final blow. Jeju was on his knees, trying to compose himself after the devastating hit. The beast monarch raised his weapon, ready to end Jeju's life with one last strike. At that moment, Beru's rage boiled over. He screamed out in desperation, calling upon the other shadow soldiers to aid their lord. The ice surrounding the battlefield began to crack, and from beneath it, a pair of glowing red eyes emerged. Greed, one of Jeju's most powerful shadows, shattered the ice that had imprisoned him. With a deep, menacing growl, Greed stepped forward. His massive form towered over the battlefield, ready to cut down anything that stood in Jeju's way. From a distance, Rakan, the beast monarch, observed the scene. The creature in front of him was no ordinary shadow. It had once been a powerful warrior, a force to be reckoned with. The Frost Monarch, too, was keenly aware of what was happening. Higher-ranking shadow soldiers, like Greed, Igris, and Tusk, had started to emerge, each breaking free from the ice that had trapped them. Their roars echoed across the battlefield, a signal that the tide of battle was about to change. The Frost Monarch looked down at Jeju, noticing his injuries. The attack from earlier had left him with what seemed like a fatal wound, and the Monarch believed the fight was nearing its end. But as the Frost Monarch prepared to finish the fight, Jeju stood with a smirk, his ice-cold gaze never wavering. Slowly his wounds began to heal, shocking both the Monarchs. With a calm yet commanding voice, Jeju activated his ability, Status Effect Recovery. The severe wounds that had been inflicted on him moments ago began to fade away as if they had never existed. Jeju's body healed itself, and he stood tall, facing the Monarchs with renewed strength. At the same time, chaos unfolded around the world. In cities like New York, London, Shanghai, and Paris, people stopped in their tracks, watching the news. The disaster happening in Seoul had caught the attention of everyone as they witnessed the destruction caused by the battle. The massive gate that had appeared in Korea had already made headlines, but now the terrifying scene of Jeju facing the Monarchs was being broadcast live across the globe. Leonard, standing nearby, was one of the few able to follow the fight with his own eyes. He watched in disbelief as Jeju's power surged. Thomas Andre, still wounded and surrounded by healers, asked what was happening, but even Leonard struggled to put it into words. The scene unfolding before him felt like the end of the world, a storm raging around Jeju, one that no ordinary human could comprehend. As Leonard continued to watch, he was struck by the realization that the Jeju he knew had changed. He wasn't the same hunter from before. Jeju had grown so much stronger in such a short amount of time that it was almost impossible to believe. Bake, also watching from a distance, knew that Jeju had always been a hunter with the potential to grow, but even Bake couldn't have imagined the level of strength Jeju had attained now. Meanwhile, Beru had finally broken free from the grip of the Plague Monarch. With a swift motion, he sliced through her grotesque nails, and the Plague Monarch let out a furious growl. Enraged, she lunged at Beru, intent on destroying him, but she was unaware that Jeju was right behind her, daggers in hand, eyes blazing with fury. Jeju's mind flashed back to the prophecy given by the creator. He had been told that he would die by a pillar of flames holding up the world, but there was something the creator hadn't mentioned, whether that pillar would truly fall or not. Gritting his teeth, Jeju gripped his daggers tighter, filled with a burning resolve. With a rapid series of strikes, Jeju attacked the Plague Monarch with deadly precision. His daggers moved like a blur, ripping into her body relentlessly, leaving her covered in wounds. The sound of metal slicing through flesh filled the air as he tore her apart, each strike more brutal than the last. As this intense battle unfolded, Seoul burned under the devastating flames of destruction. Lim Taegyu, watching from a distance, observed the chaos with a heavy heart. For a long time, he had stood by, waiting for the right moment to act. His role as a sniper had been clear, but now he questioned whether he could interfere in this battle. The elite assassins of the Fiend Guild had already been dispatched across the surrounding buildings, awaiting awaiting a signal to launch their support fire. But Lim knew the risks. Even with their combined strength, how many would survive such an assault? The enemy before them was not just any opponent. It was a monster that not even Thomas Andre, the strongest hunter, could subdue. Lim's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Should they risk everything, knowing the cost of failure? His hesitation grew heavier as he considered their slim chances of success. As Lim stood deep in thought, a sudden cold grip on his shoulder jolted him from his reverie. His heart pounded as he felt an unseen presence behind him. The voice that followed sent a chill down his spine, telling him to just sit back and watch. His body reacted on instinct. Spinning around, he swiftly drew an arrow from his bow, ready to defend himself. His voice trembled as he called out, but to his utter disbelief, there was no one behind him. The space was empty. His eyes scanned the area frantically, but not a soul could be seen. The clash between Jeju and the Monarchs was far beyond their abilities. All they could do was watch and wait for the outcome, sensing that the end of the battle was drawing near. The Plague Monarch's body, torn apart by Jeju's earlier attacks, began to regenerate rapidly. The maggots within her twisted and bound together, restoring her form as if nothing had happened. It was a horrifying sight, her regeneration seemingly unstoppable. Without hesitation, the Plague Monarch unleashed a devastating wave of poisonous magic, filling the air around Jeju with a toxic miasma. Jeju remained calm, recognizing the nature of the attack. A notification flashed in his vision. Venom effects are still present in the atmosphere, but Jeju was unfazed. He knew that poison held no power over him. Another notification appeared. Detoxification successfully completed. The Plague Monarch's rage boiled over, her form twisted, taking on the monstrous shape of a giant insect with razor-sharp mandibles outstretched. As she charged at Jeju, determined to tear him apart. But as she lunged, Jeju calmly activated his skill, Ruler's Authority. The overwhelming force of his power stopped her in her tracks. Despite her immense strength, she couldn't break free from his control. Her teeth clenched in frustration, her body unable to resist Jeju's authority. With her knocked back, Jeju seized the opportunity, his skill mutilation unleashed in a flurry of relentless strikes. The black aura surrounding his daggers ripped into her body again and again, each slash cutting deeper than the last. Kamish's wrath, glowing with dark energy, tore through the Plague Monarch's flesh without mercy. Her screams of agony echoed through the battlefield, but Jeju did not stop. He stripped her of every inch of flesh, his attacks unyielding. Finally, as the last pieces of her monstrous form disintegrated, the Plague Monarch was brought to the brink of death. In her final moments, a strange realization came over her. She could feel the approach of an all-consuming darkness. In her last breath, she marveled at the brilliance of this force. A final notification appeared in Jeju's vision. You have defeated one of the 9 monarchs, Queratia, the Plague Monarch. And with that, a cascade of notifications followed. You have leveled up. The Frost Monarch watched from a distance, his voice trembling with disbelief. He couldn't understand how this was possible. Jeju, who had only recently started wielding the Shadow Monarch's power, should not have been able to use it to such an extent. The fear that once gripped the universe under the rule of the Shadow Monarch was now resurfacing. Beside him, the Beast Monarch remained unfazed. He dismissed the Frost Monarch's concerns, insisting that Jeju was exhausted. The Beast Monarch, with a cruel grin, grabbed Beru by the neck, tightening his grip. To him, the fact that Jeju was relying on his shadow soldiers was proof of his incompleteness. An incomplete monarch, he believed, could never stand in the way of true monarchs. Beru let out a pained screech, his form flickering as his existence began to fade. Jeju's heart raced at the sight. He realized that Beru's life force was being drained, much like how the shadow soldier that was placed on Thomas Andre had been removed. Panic flashed in his eyes as he tried to summon Beru back, but the system responded with a cold refusal. Beru could not return. Jeju's expression darkened, and without hesitation, he charged at the Beast Monarch. With a powerful strike, he sent the Beast Monarch flying, freeing Beru from his deadly grip. Though Jeju had managed to prevent Beru's extinction, the weight of the battle loomed heavy on him. The Frost Monarch's body began to change, his form growing as a glacier of ice rose toward the sky. Ice smoke drifted from his mouth as he addressed Jeju with a cold, disdainful tone. To the Frost Monarch, Jeju was overconfident in his powers that still lacked a true master. With a chilling declaration, he unsheathed his weapon, an otherworldly trident radiating an ominous aura. He made his intentions clear. No matter how Jeju controlled his shadow soldiers, he would simply sever the strings that bound them to Jeju's will. Wielding his trident with authority, the Frost Monarch declared that he would trap Jeju's shadow soldiers under his icy control. He would force them into a never-ending cycle of healing and resurrection, turning them into nothing more than parasites that drained Jeju's mana. The Frost Monarch swung his trident at Jeju, its sharp edge glowing with a deadly icy aura. The force behind the attack echoed with a clear challenge. Jeju braced himself, using his daggers to block the strike, but the trident's power was overwhelming. The blade grazed Jeju's shoulder, cutting deep. Blood poured from the wound, staining his clothes as pain shot through his body. The Frost Monarch wasn't finished. Tightening his grip on the trident, he rolled through the air with a swift motion and smashed the weapon down onto the ground where Jeju had stood moments before. The earth cracked under the impact, but Jeju had already vanished, moving faster than the Monarch could track. Surprise flickered in the Monarch's eyes as he scanned the area, trying to locate Jeju. In a flash, Jeju appeared, aiming directly for the Monarch's eyes with his daggers, but the Frost Monarch, with his sharp instincts, turned his head just in time to avoid the fatal blow. Countering swiftly, the Monarch landed a heavy strike on Jeju's torso. The blow was brutal. Jeju felt his ribs crack as blood spewed from his mouth, and the impact sent him flying through the air. Jeju crashed against the ground, breaking the asphalt beneath him as he struggled to regain his balance. He stopped himself from being dragged further, his breathing heavy, his body aching from the brutal force. He silently observed the Monarch's movements, realizing how fast and dangerous his opponent was. The Frost Monarch, noticing Jeju's injuries, pressed forward with a cold determination. His pace quickened as he advanced toward Jeju, ready to end the fight swiftly. Jeju, though wounded, stood his ground, his eyes sharp as he prepared for the next attack. Their weapons clashed in rapid succession, each strike ringing out with deadly precision. Jeju focused intensely, analyzing every detail of the Monarch's movements, his speed, his breathing, the flow of his mana. Jeju's mind raced, knowing that if he could be just a little bit faster, if he could predict the Monarch's next move, he could gain the upper hand. The Frost Monarch remained unmoved by Jeju's persistence, his confidence unshaken. In his mind, it didn't matter what Jeju was planning. He believed this fight was already over. With weapons in both hands, the Monarch swung with all his might, releasing a devastating storm of ice that tore through the earth, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. But before the attack could reach Jeju, he had disappeared. In the blink of an eye, Jeju reappeared behind the Frost Monarch, his gaze locked on his opponent. He thought he had finally found the right moment, ready to strike, but just as he was about to move, something unexpected happened. The Frost Monarch turned his head slightly, a smug smile curling on his lips. Jeju's body froze, his strength draining rapidly. Everything around him started to fade into darkness as his vision blurred. The onlookers, those who had gathered to witness the fight, stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. 5 sharp claws had pierced through Jeju's chest from behind, blood dripping from the wounds. The Beast Monarch had fully transformed into his werewolf form, his massive claws sinking deep into Jeju's back. The attack was precise, hitting critical points in Jeju's body. His mind reeled from the pain as his strength faltered. The powerful dagger, Kamish's wrath, slipped from Jeju's grasp, hitting the ground with a metallic clang. The Beast Monarch standing behind him tightened his grip, driving his claws even deeper into Jeju's flesh. Blood poured from Jeju's mouth as the Beast Monarch mocked his fallen opponent, taunting him. Jeju's body was weakening, but his mind fought to stay focused. He thought of how his level had increased, of how this should have been manageable, but the pain was overwhelming. As Jeju struggled to stay conscious, the Frost Monarch stepped forward, his cold gaze fixed on him. In his hand, he held Jeju's own dagger, now coated with a layer of ice. Without hesitation, the Frost Monarch plunged the dagger into Jeju's chest, driving it deep. Blood surged from the wound, staining the ground beneath them. Frost Monarch watched with a twisted satisfaction, digging the dagger deeper into Jeju's chest. He spoke, his voice filled with contempt and malice as he mocked Jeju's power. The Monarch knew that this time there would be no healing, no second chance. Jeju, despite all his strength, was still incomplete, an unfinished version of the Shadow Monarch. As Jeju's life force faded, the Frost Monarch continued his cruel monologue, describing the horrors that would befall the human world. Mountains of corpses, rivers of blood, the destruction of humanity seemed inevitable in the Monarch's eyes. And for Jeju's home, his country, there was an even crueler fate. The Frost Monarch promised to freeze every living being, trapping them in an eternity of endless suffering, unable to live or die. The torment would be endless, and the Monarch relished in the thought of it. The coldness of the dagger seeped further into Jeju's body, freezing him from the inside. His limbs grew numb, his senses dulled, and his vision began to darken. His human heart beat slower, and then it stopped. Jeju's consciousness slipped away, and soon he was floating in an empty, cold darkness. As his life ended, a series of notifications began to appear, even in the void. The player's HP is now 0, and the player has died. But then, another message followed. The player possesses the Black Heart. A new window opened, revealing that all the requirements for a passive skill had been met. As the list of Jinu's skills blinked and updated, something unknown had awakened deep within him. Even in death, Jinu's story was far from over. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching!